Sounds good to me.
All right, it works.
Okay, I told you at the end of last session, those of you that were here, that we were going to start in Matthew chapter 5, which is the Sermon on the Mount. So if you want to try and find your way to Matthew 5.
Got it.
Yep.
Chuck.
I'm especially scatterbrained today, so I don't know what that's going to be like for you. I mean, you might say what's different than normal, but Ken is going to lead us today on a journey about some of the metaphors or even parables that Jesus uses in this pinnacle sermon. This really, when we look to it, it's one of the foundational teachings of Jesus. In review, we talked about how when Jesus announced his ministry, he did so using the prophet Isaiah, but doing so in an edited fashion so that he could give his understanding of his mission, which would become the church's mission. And in that early go, he immediately put the Jews that were more Pharisaical on notice that their nationalism that was blended with their religion was not going to fly, and that was going to put him at odds with them. But Jesus he discerned that the gospel message will take root in cultures, but that the gospel doesn't rely on the culture, or it doesn't have to be packaged in one particular culture. I love it that, at least in our tradition, we don't insist on one particular language, for example, or one particular translation, except for Ethel. I mean, and many of us have grown up with that. It still exists today. Some people say if it's not King James, then you're not being authentic.
I have King James.
Well, there you go. So.
It's good for those ones that you know that you memorized. Otherwise,
It's New King James. New King James.
So we don't insist upon language, culture, customs. We try to focus on the gospel, and it reminded me of what I tried to bring Sunday with God Bless America, yes, perfect prayer, as long as we're understanding. We're not saying, my government, right or wrong, whatever. I mean, whatever nationalism you can get into, that's not part of what we're about.
I liked your lyrics.
Oh, good.
I really did.
Thank you.
Very befitting.
If you would write a letter to Irving Berlin.
Okay, all right. And hopefully he'll understand and get them.
So with that, after the Beatitudes, we should read about some of the metaphors. I call them metaphors. Sometimes Ken calls them parables. They're so short, it doesn't feel like a parable to me. But and try to ask yourself why Jesus would use these images, and why would he think they're so important that they would be the first thing right after he leads off with the Beatitudes. That really gives it emphasis. And then he gives these images, which we read over, and it's just a few verses. But for Ken, this is a place of prominence. Why would Jesus use this to teach what the mission is about and what it's not about?
Hey, Mickey.
Hi. Oh, I'm glad you're there. Good to see you. We are in Matthew chapter 5, Mickey, at the Sermon on the Mount. Right after the Beatitudes, Jesus puts in a high prominence these metaphors or parables using some images. And we're going to really try and say, why would Jesus use these images? And Ken parses these images to the point where you might say it's getting into too much molecular.
I wanted to tell you what my Bible says. It says the similitudes.
Similitude, yeah. That's one I haven't used since probably 9th grade.
Right. But there you go. But that's what it says, starting with 13.
Okay. So, yeah, we will look at verse 13 in chapter 5. And let's go to verse 16. If somebody would read nice and loud, verses 13 to 16 in Matthew chapter 5.
You are the salt, you are the salt of the earth, but what good is salt if it has lost its flavor? Can you make it salty again? It will be thrown out and trampled underfoot as worthless. You are the light of the world, like a city on a hilltop that cannot be hidden. No one lights a lamp and then puts it under a basket. Instead, the lamp is placed on a stand where it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your good deeds shine out for all to see, so that everyone will praise your heavenly Father.
Very good. Okay, any translation translation differences in yours that stand out?
That was NLT. We're all NLT over here.
That's what I'm on too, I better switch. Okay.
What do you got, Jim? What is yours?
I've got the
Yours
New
is
International Version, but it's very similar to what yours is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
NIV.
Oh, wait a second, look them all up.
Susan.
So we've all, I mean, you probably, there's no way you could even count how many times you've heard this in your life by now. And you've heard it so often. And I want to, before we go to Kim, I want to focus on the metaphors of salt and light as they pertain to Christian ministry, sharing the gospel. Why would he use those? And what those phrases have meant to you over the years. So we'll start with salt of the earth. That's a phrase that you know, you've grown up with, you've probably used it, you've heard people use it. Is there a way to pinpoint when people use it what you think is meant?
Really good person.
Okay, someone who is, and you said not even a really good Christian, a really good person sometimes. Okay, yeah. So we look at that, and somebody here might, instead of saying an example or the definition of salt of the earth, they might say Ken Johnson, or they might say, oh gosh, why I have his name and I'm not going to say it now. Lester Dre.
Yeah.
So you may use an example rather than a definition. But Jesus uses it for that very thing. Why do you think he would pick salt?
Salt doesn't go away, ever.
Okay.
It never disintegrates.
Okay, yeah, salt is a very, very stable compound. Okay, so there's something very stable about salt. So it gives us pause here when it says if salt has lost its flavor and it's thrown out to be trampled underfoot. In modern times, that makes no sense. Why? Because we are used to pure salt. By the time we get salt, it is the pure chemical. Have you ever been to a salt mine? Really?
They've never put me there.
Well, next time I go to Kansas, come with me.
You have salt mines?
They have a salt mine in Hutchinson, a very famous one. And we have been on extensive tours down a mile deep in the salt mine. And it's, and parts of it are pretty stark. I mean, and the way that they had to blast and, you know, you feel for the workers who spent their careers down there doing that stuff. And now there are areas of it that are still mined for salt, but there's the tourist area that we were at. And because the climate is so dry and consistent, they have archives down there with Hollywood movies and stuff. If people want to store things to preserve them that are historically significant, they can do it there. And then they've got displays of what's there.
So is it walls of salt or is it veins of salt or how is it usually?
It is, first of all, it starts out solid and you dig into it.
Okay.
and then they have a way of blasting, and they have it set up so that they can blast out just enough so that I can't tell you how often, but every so often, and it's a fairly good, maybe 20 feet or so, they will leave a big pillar.
Oh,
And so, you know, they'll blast here, and then they'll go, and the pillar's maybe 8 feet wide or something, and then they'll blast. So there's enough stability on those pillars. And of course, you're always thinking,
Yeah.
what if it gives way? But
right. Interesting.
And so then, once they did the blasting, and it showed how they did it, they actually they'd get on a tractor that had screws at the bottom,
Yes.
you know, like a forklift, only the screws, and they would drill 12 feet, 10 feet, I don't know what it is. And then they would put in the dynamite charges,
Oh.
and they've got it precisely figured out enough that once they did that, it would collapse an area of 15 feet high, and then they would bring out, but they would have to find the veins of salt that were pure. And one of the things that we got to see was there were very few left in the place that we were, but once in a while on the walls that looked kind of gray and black, and it just looked like you were in a kind of a dank cave. It really wasn't, you know, it wasn't pure white by any means.
Okay.
In fact, the rare occasions we saw, oh, look there's a formation up there that's pretty white. And so that's what they're looking for, is the very pure salt formations. The rest of it is salt, but it's so mixed with contaminants that it's not what we're used to as salt. And I'm repeating some of the things that Ken said, but the way that they obtained salt in the Holy Land, for example, was at the Dead Sea. And they could take the water from the Dead Sea and let it evaporate, and they would get salt that was not the salt that you and I are used to. It had but it was the kind of salt they could use to preserve things. But if salt was too impure, this one says if it's lost its taste.
I see.
That's a euphemism. If it doesn't taste good. Okay, that makes more sense. If I would have taken a chunk of salt from the wall in Hutchinson, you know, because I'm sure I would have tasted the saltiness, but I would have gotten all the other sediment in it too. So that was one thing that this has taught me, that yes, salt doesn't lose its flavor.
Right.
I mean, in fact, it's stable if you heat it up. It's stable if you put it in water. It's stable it melts, but it stays, the chemical compound stays. It's one of the very few stable ones that you can always count on. So technically we say, yeah, salt never loses its flavor, but salt can be to the point where it doesn't taste good. And I think that's the euphemism. If in a paraphrase, we might say, if salt no longer tastes good or becomes impure, it's good for nothing. You can't put it on food, you can't preserve it. And the only thing it's good for is to throw it out into the street to walk on. When I went to Muskegon for the first time, it was August, and it was the most beautiful August day. That's how they tricked us to going up in there. It was August 26th, and they said it was the best weather they'd had ever. It was just paradise. And so we're driving around seeing Muskegon, and we drive up past Muskegon Lake, which is a good 5-mile long lake that ends up, it's one of the very few deep water ports that you can get in from Lake Michigan. And so the deep water vessels would come through the channel and bring their coal. They had a coal plant there or whatever. I used to say that's how I had my shoes brought in, because nothing else was large enough. So we went by, and there were these mountains next to the lake, and they were kind of white. And I thought, what are those white mountains? And they said, that's the road salt. And I said, well, I hope that's a 15-year supply. And we found that first year we were there, again, they tricked us. It was a mild winter, and they barely cut into the next year they ran out. So when I say mountains of salt, it was prolific, the amount of salt they go through for the roads. So
There goes your car.
I never knew where they mined salt before. It's interesting. We grew up with coal miners where I was at in Wyoming, but never salt, so,
All right, we'll do a field trip.
yeah.
What
I've got,
what is the salt thing that we see if you go out, which road is it on? I cut across to go way out on the west side. You pass these huge mounds of salt. That's not a mine, I guess, is it just,
It's just
nobody
salt.
knows?
I guess I'm not
Been
aware
there a long
of that.
time.
Yeah, Tempe's got a salt processing place they closed several years ago, so I don't know.
It feels like if you go out past El Mirage.
Yeah.
But like way down, I think it's below Glendale, I'm not sure which road I'm cutting across. I've cut across Indian School, I've cut across Glendale, I've cut across Northern.
That's where SRP got its name.
So as I'm having this
Right.
discussion, I'm finding myself just giving you a preview of what Ken says, so I probably shouldn't just tell you what I've seen, but
But he doesn't know about
Yeah, please,
Kansas.
because we can probably answer questions. I was gonna say, yeah.
what he's gonna do is give you some pause on why would he pick salt and light? And he will,
Salt.
just to give you a little
Salt is
preview,
salt.
salt is commonly found. And it's not exclusive to, and it is an absolutely vital staple for life. He even observes that the pioneers in our country could only go so far as they could find salt to preserve their food, to purify things, so they had to be able to mine or find or do salt. You can actually do that process that I said from the Dead Sea. You can do it at the Mediterranean at the salt water, but it's a much lower percentage of salt content, so your efforts don't yield as much.
Right.
And so there are other ways of finding and getting salt. But because it's so common and so necessary to life, Ken said this is like the gospel. It's not exclusive to one area or another. It is widespread and it is absolutely essential. So that's one reason that he would use that. Why would he use light? Again, same reasons. I mean, light is a staple of life. And it is ubiquitous. And no matter what culture you find yourself in, and how many cultures we know about and the ones we don't know about, they all use salt and they all use light, every single one. So Ken thinks there's great significance in this. And so I don't know for you if that seems like, yes, okay, that's good for us to pause and really parse what Jesus means here, or if you're feeling like that's too much minutia. So I'll have to leave it to you to decide. But because those are ubiquitous, he thinks it's very significant why he chose those. But not only for those reasons. And he's going to come up with some contrasts and some comparisons between salt and light, and hopefully will make us think about, okay, so the gospel with salt, for example, it only is effective when it is in contact. So until you put it on the green beans and it melts or whatever it does. And I use green beans because when I was a kid, our presbytery had some great youth activities. I was so fortunate. I wish we could still sustain those things. And we had a 25-hour famine. We did a hunger. Can you imagine teenagers?
No.
150 of us or 200, whatever, and we got together as a presbytery youth, and we got pledges for how many hours we would go. And it was monitored by medical staff, and they made sure that, they didn't want us to just go with water. They had juice, and so they were very safe about it. But we weren't going to eat for 25 hours, and we were going to raise funds for hunger, and then we played simulation games to help us understand when there's drought and when there's places in poverty and when there's abundance. And but talk about spoiled. Here in this little group of 200 kids, the leader had some connection, and so in walks, oh, come on, Harry Chapin.
Oh, my.
Oh, yeah. He had-
With his guitar.
Yeah.
Did I tell you this before?
No, but I just was reading about him. He had a food.
Okay, so he was very committed to that.
Yeah, and then,
Unfortunately, not long after that, he died in a car accident.
Oh.
But Cats in the Cradle,
Ah.
you all know Harry Chapin?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So he came and gave us a personal concert, and there I was, right in the, sitting cross-legged, you
So
know.
cool.
And I couldn't even appreciate it as well as I should have, but I did appreciate it. And so he sang Cats in the Cradle and WOLD, I think, and Taxi.
Taxi.
So he sang all his songs just on a guitar with some, an amazing thing. And the reason this comes to my mind is the green beans thing. Because they brought in a philosopher to give one of our talks about, and he had ways of putting into phrases things that I thought were very thoughtful. And one resonated with me. And he said, I don't know what it is about salt, but when you have green beans, salt makes the green beans taste greener.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought, he's absolutely right. I never would have said it that way, but he's just the right amount of salt makes the green beans taste greener. And I knew exactly what he meant. The other one was, he was talking about swimming lessons and how there was a child having fear and frustration. And the instructor said, well, she won't learn to swim until she learns to let the water hold her. I've used that with Natalie.
That one too.
Yeah, so sometimes a good philosopher can put into words. So there's what the salt does. All right, back to the lesson today. I get to digress a lot. Salt, like the gospel, is only effective when it is brought in contact with its recipient. Whether it's preserving, whether it's adding flavor, whether it's melting ice, it only is effective up close and in contact. In contrast to that, light travels huge distances sometimes. And so there's he talks about how sometimes the gospel is effective up close, sometimes the gospel is effective broadcast, if you will. Those are the kinds of comparisons and contrasts that we're going to look at. So I'm inclined to go to the video before I do any more spoilers. And I will try to make sure I do this properly so that the people watching on Zoom are able to see it. So that means I have to share screen. I want to be able to. Okay, there we go. Share, Canva. Boy, that's in my way. Click, no. Turn it. No, that's not what I wanted to do. I want to hit there. That's what I want to do. Bingo, got it. So they should see this at home now. And let me get on the correct one. So that's number 5. We've already done number 5.
You need salt. You need salt and you need light.
There's number 6. Okay. Okay, and then wave at me if you can't hear at home, or shout out or do something so that I know. Click. Okay, it's coming.
Bless you.
Baby. And I'm very happy that you have chosen to continue in your study together with me of some of the great passages of the New Testament that set out for us the mission of the Christian and the mission of the Christian community. We arrived in our last study to the great cluster of parables of light and salt which occur in the 5th chapter of Matthew. To be sure that they are before us, let's again read them. If you care to, you may want to open to Matthew chapter 5 and start in verse 13, or to follow along on the screen with us. The text reads, "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trodden underfoot by men. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hid, nor do they light a lamp and put it under a bushel, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. At the end of our last study, we looked at the properties of salt and the properties of light. And we said that this is kind of the traditional way in which this text is usually examined. But no, we want to ask the question, why do we have these three parables together in a cluster? One parable on salt and two parables about light. The salt is the salt which if it disintegrates, is thrown out, and the light of the lamp that is in the house, or the light of the city that is set on a hill. Now, the first thing we want to do is to take salt and light, and we want to examine their contrasts. What are the points at which there is a difference between the way salt works and the way light works? When we finished with that list, we will then look at the comparisons. At what points are salt and light somewhat similar? And let's try and figure out what our Lord is saying. Now, this list is amazingly long. We're going to find 8 different ways in which the two are contrasting, and 6 different ways in which they are comparable. And you could ask yourself and say, well, now, gee whiz, I mean, this is an awful lot of stuff that you're getting out of this text. Are you sure you're not sort of dumping your own ideas on it? I hope I'm not. But what I perceive in these very carefully crafted parables, as we have indicated before, they are like a great diamond. And they shed light in a variety of directions, and depending on who the audience is, depending on where you're coming from, depending on who you are, you're going to find a different face of that diamond that is flashing light back to you. Sometimes we can easily say that any parable is like a table, only the parable, unlike the table, does not stand on all 4 legs. That is, when Jesus says, I am the good shepherd, does he mean that we're stupid animals? No. Well, how do we know he doesn't mean that? It's because that meaning would not be in harmony with the rest of the things that Jesus teaches. Or when he says, I am the door, does that mean he is a lifeless piece of wood and has nothing to say? I mean, doors don't talk. No, because that interpretation, although it fits the idea of a door, is not appropriate to extract out of the parable because it is not in harmony with the rest of the message of Jesus. I think there's our control and corrective. We must not allow ourselves to draw out of the parable ideas which are not in harmony with the rest of the teachings of Jesus. But
Okay, let me pause there just to make sure we've got that concept. So, and I told you, Ken's going to go into some minutia on why he thinks salt and light are there's 8 contrasts and 6 comparisons, and he said, you're getting a lot out of there. Are you dumping your own thoughts into it? And so he's coming at it from, I'm doing this in a way that I believe this is what Jesus intended, and these things will be in harmony with the other stuff that Jesus taught. So I'm not taking this and getting into stretching the metaphor too far, like he did with the door there. He says, yeah, or the dumb animals. These things are not in harmony, so I'm only going to bring out things that are in harmony with Jesus' teachings. And next week there'll be a quiz on the 8 contrasts and the 6. And you'll all have a leg up on Tom and Nancy.
we are free to find that the great diamond sheds light in a variety of directions, and this allows us to, as it were, unpack the theological content of the great metaphors of Jesus.
Okay, I want to stop there too. Ken has done this before, but when he talks about looking at these metaphors that Jesus, or the parables, and the rich meaning of them, he uses a diamond as comparison. Because what does a diamond do? It refracts the light, and when you look at a diamond from one angle, you get it. It has meaning. So it's not simply one meaning. It has all kinds of things. So when you hear Ken pulling out 14 different things, he's saying on this edge of the diamond, this is what it reflects. On this edge, that's why he goes into diamonds. So we've gone from salt mining to diamond mining.
Okay.
I didn't want you to be confused. All he's saying is that there are so many aspects to each of these carefully crafted images that they are like a diamond, and you can look at them from different angles.
Of which these three metaphors are a part, and notice their prominence. In the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, right after the great Beatitudes, these are the first images that are set before the reader. So the contrasts. First of all, salt works invisibly and light works visibly. When we carry out our witness as disciples or the church engages in mission, there are aspects of the way we witness to our faith that are visible. Everybody sees it. And there are aspects of the way in which we carry out our ministry that are invisible. You don't see that salt working on that meat, preserving those pickles, cleansing that wound, because the salt was a disinfectant for the people of the ancient Middle East. It's doing its work, but very, very quietly. There are people who say, no, ministry only really matters if it's a big deal and it's out front and everybody can see it. An awful lot of Christian ministry takes place very quietly, and no one knows that that ministry is being engaged in except the people involved.
Okay, so let's take some examples of ministry, and you can do visible, but I especially like that when it's not really out there and prominent, when it's behind the scenes or something. Do we have some examples of ministry in either way? Ministry that's very visible, or ministry that is almost imperceptible?
When we make a call and visit, when we
Yes.
call somebody on the phone and ask them how they are and visiting and that type of, it's contact because we're a church family and we're concerned about them. We don't come back to church and say, okay, I called these 3 people this week. It's really
Or even visitations,
visitations when you visit.
visitations, because we don't really talk about it either, except for the people who go,
Right, right,
And bringing food
Yeah.
to someone,
right.
Right.
Meal, when you bring food to them.
A lot of those things are unsung. Prayer. Hopefully, all of you are at home at night praying for good sermons.
sometimes.
And so our prayers oftentimes, you can pray for someone and they never knew you prayed for them.
That's true.
But we have trust in God that our prayer is transformative for ourselves and for others in God's good way. My mentor from Kansas, the retired pastor / retired psychotherapist, talked about his time in Benton Harbor as a pastor. And that congregation still exists today, and it's pretty interesting. It's at a place where the racial divides in that community are pretty stark, or have been historically. And this Presbyterian church was successful in kind of reaching across cultural lines, not only in the racial sense, but they had a large population, relatively, of people who had been incarcerated. And that was part of their constituency. And they developed a ministry that worked well with that. The reason I bring this up for ministry that goes sometimes not visibly is they were very intentional about that. And my mentor, he said one of his favorite things that he had developed in ministry there and elsewhere, he called it commando benevolence. Commando benevolence. You go and you do something good when nobody's watching, and then you don't take credit for it.
Right.
And so he introduced me to that phrase, commando benevolence. And he gave an example of one thing that they did in their community. Apparently some school there was some issue that with playground equipment that had gotten so dilapidated, and they could not come up with an agreement on replacing this playground equipment. And it was a lingering issue in the community, but it never got resolved.
It needed to be.
He led an effort underground, and he said in one night, we had enough people and enough of the equipment, and we went and we tore the old down and we put the new up, and the next morning it was there.
Ta-da.
And no one ever knew. where it came from.
I like that.
That was one of his examples of command of benevolence. That was the church ministry, and it wasn't done for flashiness. It wasn't done for, oh, give us credit or see how great we are, or even, Jesus is Lord, see what he can do. It was really a trust situation with the community, that we're just going to do what's good and right and really not let the right hand know what the left hand's doing.
Right.
Okay. Any other examples of invisible ministry?
Ministry is for a church sometimes very quiet, and ministry for an individual is many times a very quiet affair in which damage is done. It's not really going to work unless it is very quietly done, invisible to those around. But then at the same time, we've got two visions of mission here. We've talked about these before, but let's look at them afresh. And this can be called, in technical language, the centrifugal and the centripetal forces of mission. In this case, we're looking at the two parables on light and not looking at light and salt. And perhaps this explains partly why Jesus gives us two parables and not one. The city set on the hill sheds its light out beyond the community. It's out there in that darkness beyond. And it's out to the world, sure enough, out there. At the same time, the light that is in the house is only seen by the people who come in. You're not going to find that light or see it or be enriched by it or be enlightened by it unless you come into the house. And you can look at a study of the history of mission all across the centuries by looking at those two forces. Has this community been willing to reach out beyond itself? And has this individual or community created the quality of life and fellowship within itself that others are attracted in?
Okay, so we'll stop there. So now he's left salt behind. He said, now he's given us two examples of how light is experienced. One is a city on a hill which can't be hidden. There's no way. And its
Right.
light goes out to the world. And again, we're comparing this to the gospel and to those of us who are called to minister the gospel. And so a key element of it is the light is not hidden, and it sheds light into the darkness in a broad way. But there's another aspect where, and that's what the centripetal, when it goes out, the centrifugal is when it comes toward when something's spinning.
Inside.
I think, when you're on the merry-go-round and I spin it too fast and the kids fly off,
Yeah.
that's centripetal force. The centrifugal means toward the inside. And he said both are equally true. And so when you look at a church's ministry and mission, are they reaching out beyond themselves? Are they focused also on shedding light on the inside? And is that in balance? And we know how difficult it is to keep things in balance. And so we all know churches that are kind of inward focused and don't do a very good job of anything outside the doors. We can fall into that trap here. We love what Sunday morning feels like and what the community feels like, but do we really reflect it? If we went around and interviewed people in the neighborhood, what do you think goes on there? How many people wouldn't have any idea? So one of the things we have to compare our mission to is, are we focused inward? That's not a bad thing. That's part of what light's about. How are we then sharing that light in a way that others are experiencing it in a broader fashion?
Certain periods of the life of the church has said, worldwide has said, worship continues. We are celebrating the mysteries of God. We have the sacraments. If anybody wants to wander in, they can. And the people who sort of see this as the vision of mission that is required, they take the words of institution, and where Jesus, when he gives the Holy Communion to his disciples, he says, whenever you eat this bread and drink this cup, you show forth the Lord's death until he come. And the word to show forth is the word to proclaim. You preach the Lord's death. You proclaim the Lord's death. You evangelize with the Lord's death until.
Okay, this really rang with me. The pastors that I grew up under, and the one in particular, and I tend to repeat what I learned. And one thing I haven't repeated is, in the words of institution, whenever you eat this bread and drink this cup, I usually say you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes again. Right. Which is not incorrect. I grew up with you show forth. And I had missed that is the light, by eating this bread and drinking, we actually are witnessing and we're proclaiming, showing forth. So did you notice I said that at the last communion visit?
Yes, you did.
I said when we went to see June and we went to see Mary Lou.
Right.
Because I just watched this, you show forth. So you never know what you're gonna get.
I know.
And so the folks who were kind of stuck on this side of that particular two-sided coin, as it were, say, aha, here we are. We have the sacraments. That's all that is required of us, because the sacraments themselves are proclaiming the Lord's death until he comes. Fine. That's fair. It does. That's there. The light is seen when you come into the house, and only if you come into the house. But the other end, not only is our task to be like the lamp put on the lampstand in the house, but it is to be the city that is set on the hill where the light goes beyond ourselves. And the two are necessarily interrelated. There's no point in bringing someone in from that darkness unless there is the warm glow of light within the house. There is no point in bringing that lost sheep from the hillsides unless somebody back there has chopped up some clover for that poor hungry sheep to eat, because what's the point of bringing him home if you're not going to feed him? There's no point in having one of these without the other in balance. I've been in churches in which people are, oh man, they're gung-ho for foreign missions, and they're ready to give money for missions all over the world. But the people across the street, well, I mean, they're not our kind, I mean, they're not in our economic level. They don't dress as nicely as we do. And, well, they're not the kind of people whose company we enjoy. So what are they doing? They are letting their light shine out like the light of the city that is set on a hill, way out there in places long ways away, and they're happy to pay professionals like me to go and be a witness halfway around the world so that they won't feel badly of the fact that they really don't care about the people across the street, whose company they really don't enjoy. There we are, the light on the hill, and trying to put the lamp that is supposed to be there for those who come in, and trying to put that lamp out. No, this vision tells us of both. But then we find that there is another contrast that is in these two images. One is the light is specifically for the cosmos. It is for the world. And at the same time, we are told that the salt is the salt of the earth. Read it rather, the land. Whenever you get the word haaretz in Hebrew, and you get somebody like our Lord or one of the prophets using this great Hebrew word, and certainly that's the word that would be behind this Greek word, which is gay, from which we get agriculture. And it's the same root. In Greek, it sort of beefs up into English as the word agriculture, and you can translate it the earth. But we're really not talking about a farming image here. And whenever someone of the first century Jewish tradition and all of the prophets and saints before that are talking with this word, you have to ask, does it mean the earth or does it mean the land, namely the Holy Land, the land of Israel? In this case, I think that's what it means. And I think Jesus has given two images. And one is that the light is meant to go out to the world, everybody out there. The outside community. This, in a sense, is related to what we just talked about, but has a different edge. It is also meant for the inner community. The message is for the Aretz, the people who are like us, our own inner community, and their need to see that light and to be drawn to it. Then fourth, there is the danger of hiddenness. We're talking about contrasts. The city that is set on the hill cannot be hidden. No way. Impossible. Don't try. You're not going to manage. The very fact that the light is on the hill means it's going to shine out. Now people really shouldn't put a lamp under a bushel. They should put it on a lampstand, but they can put it under the bushel if they want to. And we know lots of people who do. So there is that danger on one side that the lamp might be hidden, and there is the impossibility of the light being hidden because it is like a light that is in a city on the top of a hill. Aspects of the gospel, we don't have to worry about them. They are going to come out our pores. People are going to inevitably know that here's the church on the corner. There are people there. They come to worship. They are engaged in ministry, and it cannot be hidden. And there are other ways. There is the danger of hiddenness. We move into the marketplace. We move into the secular world, or in the case of where I live, where I have spent my life in the Arab world, as Christians, we move into the world of Islam. And there is that tremendous danger that we, in order to play it safe, we try to push that light back there under the bushel rather than allowing it to be seen on the lampstand. And then fifth, we can talk about the question of distance. Light works at a distance. Salt only functions if it's in contact with the food or the meat or the wound. If the salt is that far away, it's useless. Brilliant light can shine light at great distance. Discipleship is also ministry. Mission is also of these two kinds. There are times, places in which the ministry we are doing is at a distance. We are a part of a team. Maybe we sit at a desk. Maybe we shuffle papers. Maybe we work cameras. Maybe we're sitting writing books in an office. Maybe we are engaged in some kind of work in which the actual light that is being shed is not something in which we have direct contact. We are a part of a team that finally that light goes out far beyond us. We may not even see the people on whom that light shines. I am engaged in things of this kind because I am privileged to write books trying to interpret the faith, both in English for the English-speaking world and in Arabic for the Arabic Christian world. And I sit there and I spend hours and hours and days trying to research out these texts, try to understand them afresh from the culture of the Middle East. And I say to myself, gee, I wonder if anybody out there ever really reads this stuff. And I'm delighted when I find that maybe someone has and they're helped by it. The light at a distance. But at the same time, also we are called upon to be salt until you touch the deepest hurt in that wound, unless you actually are in contact with that food and bring a quality of a life and flavor to it. Nothing is going to happen. We can be in the same office with somebody and we never touch them. We can work in the same building and never touch them. We can be a part of the same teaching staff and never touch them. We can pass them day after day after day and pass like trains in the night. And ministry like the salt doesn't happen until we touch where those people really are. I think Jesus is talking about both. Then we also notice that the results of failure are different. The light, if it goes out, strike a match and relight it. But Jesus says if the salt loses its saltiness, it's worthless. Forget it. Throw it out. No comeback, no recovery. Now here we find a very puzzling problem in that in the Greek text, the word that is used in Greek for saying that the salt has lost its saltiness is really the word for becoming stupid. It's from, we get the English word moron from it. So it really says in Greek, if the salt turns into a moron, very peculiar. And any chemist will tell you that salt is an element that is very, very stable. It doesn't change form. You can heat it, it's still salt. You can dry it out, it's still salt. Get it wet, nothing happens. put it aside, air it, don't air it. I mean, it's a very, very stable chemical, unlike other chemicals that all kinds of things that can quickly change into something else. So why does Jesus take the image of salt? Why does he take something that when you really look at it, this doesn't change at all? How can the salt lose its saltiness? Because as salt, it never does. That's, folks, because the kind of salt which we have on our tables has been purified. The companies that take the stuff, they make it pure, and they take out whatever other bits and pieces are in the salt. And so when we shake it on our meat, it's pure salt. But the salt of the first century was not like that. The only places that they could get salt, really, was it would come in from flat salt lakes in Cyprus or on the Sea of Galilee. The Dead Sea, they would take water out, it would dry up, and then they would scrape up the salt after it had dried. Or sometimes they would do that along the Sea of Mediterranean itself, although it was kind of harder there because the percentage of salt wasn't that high. And this salt has impurities in it. And if the impurities reach a certain level, then the salt becomes very unstable. And we've got stories from the 19th century of some time in which somebody thought that the price of salt was going to go up, and so he went out and bought a whole bunch of sacks of the stuff, put it in his basement. Whoops, his basement was a bit damp, and the stuff got damp, and as it got damp, it decomposed. And even accounts that I have read of the 19th century, when they were still using this unpurified salt, that the poor fellow who put all this money into those bags of salt, what's he going to do? Well, you can't throw it in the backyard, it'll poison the ground. You can't throw it on your fields because your animals might eat too much of it and it wouldn't be good for them. Besides, you're not going to grow anything wherever you put that. You can't put it on your compost pile because it will destroy its effectiveness. What are you going to do? Well, the only place you can get rid of it is throw it out in the street and people walk on it. And the idea of feet and of walking on something is an incredible insult. The stuff you dump in the street is the stuff that is absolutely worthless, and you don't care what happens to it, and it is unclean, and it is polluted, and people walk on it. So what is Jesus talking about? I think he's talking about the fact that the gospel which we receive within our cultures always has impurities in it. Inevitably, it's going to have bits and pieces from the language and culture of which we are a part. And those bits and pieces are gradually fused into the gospel as we see it. And we are not even sensitive to those. And it really takes somebody from beyond us to point those out. And that if those impurities reach a certain level, we're going to have trouble. Because the whole thing is going to decompose and finally end up to be worthless. Again, this great theologian, Daniel Thembai Rajanayana of India, gives us a wonderful story about this, not in his writings, but one of his lectures, which a friend of mine attended and heard in person, in which he said, look, you people are always talking about the indigenization of the gospel taking root within the culture. He said, come to me to South India, and I'll show you churches in which half of the church became Christian from a background of high-class Hinduism, and the other half of the church came from a background of the low-class Hindus, the outcasts. Their grandfathers were street sweepers, so they're worshiping in one church. So when they come to have communion, what happens? Well, they've got two communion tables, one up on the platform and another one down below. And if your grandfather was a Brahmin, a high-class Hindu, you can jolly well take your communion from the upper table because you're really first-class Christian. And if your grandfather was an outcast, a street sweeper, you can have your communion from the lower table so these upper folks up there won't get upset. Come on. At the very point, at the most sacred point in which we affirm our oneness in Christ, you're going to divide the community on the basis of the caste system of your grandfathers? You've got to be kidding.
That's a stark example.
Interesting.
You gotta know the
sometimes
Hindus.
Yeah, but, and he's going to go on to say, the Indian people wouldn't even notice that. Well, we're just doing what
That's what they
Indian
do.
people do. So somebody outside of that would have to express the outrage.
And they would be outraged that you would even say anything.
Well, but that's part of the Christian teaching. So he's saying, and when you compare that to salt now, that makes it so much clearer to me, salt with impurities.
Uh-huh.
The gospel is the gospel.
Right.
But if we allow the impurities to take over, then it's worthless. And in this case, that's an egregious example. Unfortunately, we're guilty of the same. And so sometimes we need to hear from outside. It was for me, and it still is the case, I've known very few, but I've known some churches that have achieved welcoming in and having a very diverse cultural, economical, just a very diverse congregation that that I was growing up in was mostly white, mostly retired, mostly. And I learned this very starkly in Muskegon. With our intentions, we desperately wanted people of color. We desperately wanted that. We couldn't, fall all over ourselves to welcome people, and never achieved that. And what I didn't realize until then is that we were unconsciously sending signals that this isn't the place for you. If you like that kind of music, if you dress this kind of way, if you come from that segment. We were so, the gospel was so mixed with our cultural expectations that we were unintentionally sending signals that, okay, this is who's acceptable here. That's a convicting feeling. And I think we're still susceptible to that in some ways. Sunday, I became aware, maybe I'll stop the recording here. Let me pause it. If I can, I don't know how to do it here.
I always think of it as unwelcoming instead. I've gone into churches, I'm like, well, that's not for me. It's like, no, it's for you, what you feel comfortable with or what you're looking for. And we're just not looking for what we have.
Right.
It's not like we're not wanting them. It's just like,
I just want to pause. Cancel.
Yeah,
Okay, we'll go back to that and
that's weird.
see if we can get Ken started again here.
The Indian who sits there doesn't sense the problem. They're just doing it the Indian way. The person from outside that culture will perceive that this is outrageous. And so we need people from beyond ourselves to be in our midst to point out, for example, the places at which we have made the cross and the flag a single symbol. And we have polluted the gospel by so doing. And finally, in terms of the contrasts, we notice that men and women are involved. This is kind of lost in the translation. I was reading from the Revised Standard, which has a mistake in it. I hope it's corrected in the future. It says, "You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hid." And everybody knows, of course, that men are the builders and that they build the cities in the Middle East as other places in the world. Then verse 15 in Greek says, "Nor do they light a lamp." Well, unfortunately, the translators of the Revised Standard said, "Nor do men light a lamp." The word men is simply not in the text. It just says, "Nor do they light a lamp and put it under a bushel but on a stand." And of course, everybody knows that the task of lighting lamps in a Jewish household is the task of the women. And indeed, in the Babylonian Talmud, it talks about the certain tasks of the women which are really bad news, for which the woman has really got to be, corrected if she makes mistakes in these areas. It mentions 3, and one of them is the lighting of the lamps. And so what has Jesus done? He's taken parables, one of which is clearly and distinctly from the life experience of men, and the other is clearly and distinctly from the life experience of women, and has put them together into a single collection of parables, affirming the importance in his mind that his message should reach the deepest levels of everybody listening to him, both the men and the women. Okay, there we are, 8 contrasts. Now let's look briefly at the points of comparison. What do we find? Well, in a sense, both can fail. The light can be hidden under the bushel. You're stupid if you do it, but it's possible. And the salt, if there are too many impurities, can decompose. There is that danger. Not that the failure is as in the failure of the ministry of Jesus, that Judas walked away. But no, the failure can come out of our inadequacies and failures. And second, we notice that both are costly. Both burn up energy. There's no light that has ever been shining at any time, anywhere in the world, but what that light burned up some energy somewhere. There was fuel going into that light. And salt is not effective in any of the ways in which salt serves us, except as that salt melts. One of the problems, I think, in ministry is that we need the energy to carry it out. Actually, 3 things are required. First of all, we have to have a task, and second, we have to have the tools for that task, and third, we have to have the energy to carry it out. You've got to see that there is a room which needs to be swept, and you've got to get your hands on a broom, and then you've got to get yourself up out of the chair and get the job done. And Paul, in the 12th chapter of Corinthians, talks about these and says that the Spirit gives to you the gifts, and that the Lord gives to you your task, because the Lord assigns the tasks to us, and thereby assigns for us the specific thing that we're supposed to do, and then God gives to us energy, energizes us. In a sense, we've got the Trinity involved. And then the third thing we notice by comparisons is that both are for the purpose of serving others. That salt is not in the salt shaker sitting there on the table because it looks nice, because it's serving itself. It is there to be used on the meat which you eat. And the lamp is not there in the corner of your room or over your bed or on your desk because it's serving itself. It is there to serve the person whom that lamp is there to serve. The purpose of ministry is not to serve ourselves, but others. There are people who play tricks with themselves. They're out there in ministry because they have inner needs which they need to satisfy. And they're not there really to serve others. They've got to get an audience together to listen to them witness because they have inner needs. And never mind what's being said, and never mind whether or not they really care for you, they've got to offload this thing which they're doing. Now, says Jesus, through these parables we find out that ministry is for others and not for ourselves. And finally, also in terms of comparisons, we notice that both are indispensable. What is this all about? This tells us that Jesus, when he picked these illustrations, did not say, you are the phylacteries of the world, the special little leather boxes which Jews of the first century made and put words of the Torah and tied it on their foreheads when they went to their prayers. He doesn't say, you are the church bells of the world. And some places they don't have bells. They call people to assemblies by banging on stones which make a noise, or wooden plaques which make a noise. He doesn't say, you are the prayer rugs of the earth. And lots of people don't have rugs. He takes light and salt. I can't imagine anything he could have picked that is more universally found in every culture, everywhere in the world, irrespective of your language and your history and your tradition, than these 2 events. Every house has to have light, and we cannot get along without the salt which our bodies need. The pioneers of America could only spread out across this great land as they could find salt, because without salt they couldn't preserve their food, and thereby they couldn't make it through the winter. And sure enough, Jesus is talking about his message, which is a universal for all. And please notice that both make a statement about the nature of that world out there. It says, the light says that the world is dark and needs light. And the salt tells us that there is something out there that is rotting and tasteless and infected. There's something wrong with the world which the light and the salt will correct. It makes a statement about the nature of the context within which light and salt do their work. And finally, we find out that both assume a given. When we're told that we are the salt of the earth and we are the light of the world, we notice that Jesus is talking to the disciples. He sees the disciples and goes up the mountain and sits down and talks to them. Why? Because it is his light and his salt that has created them into light and salt. There can be no pride in ministry. We are not going out with our brilliance or with our talents. We are light and salt only as his gifts have turned us into light and salt. And so perhaps with these contrasts and comparisons, we can dig into the tremendous riches that are in these parables of Jesus as he presents them to us in this cluster of parables, which come to us in verses together and impact upon us and our understanding of our discipleship and our mission. Amen.
Amen.
Stop here.
That was really cool. He
Okay,
gave
well,
light and
hopefully I
salt to
did that
each of
correctly.
those disciples.
That's a lot, I mean, for salt and light. And so I want to make sure that you're okay, you're on board with Ken's style here, or if it's too much.
No, that's great.
It's good.
I tend to like going into this depth and considering the comparisons and all of the minutia that brings out different facets of light from the diamond, if you will. And one thing I caught, let's see if I can get it again here. It was one of the last things he said about the comparison of salt and light. They were ubiquitous. What was the other? Oh, it talks about the context of the world that we're in. That the world's nature is darkness. The world's nature is impurity, infection, because of the fall. And so light and salt are absolutely necessary for this dark world, for this world that is in need of, both light and salt are disinfecting. Sunlight, for example.
Right.
So, and it always reminds me of that when people say the nature of evil and trying to understand it. Again, the philosopher side comes out and says, oops, we're not quite ready yet, Maddie. The philosopher side comes out, and I've used this example before, when people consider, why is there still evil in the world? Well, that's the context of the world as it is in its fallen state, as far as we know. And that God has not abandoned that, but that's where salt and light is needed. And I like to, not only the parable of the wheat and the tares, I love that one to
I
say,
was just going to say that.
God said that the wheat has to grow up alongside the weeds. We can't tear them apart or we'll destroy. We'll have to let them, so that's one of the reasons that explains why there's still evil in the world. And then at the end, God will sort it out and we can trust in that. That's one of my favorites. My other favorite is if I were to ask Jim to get over and turn on the light, you don't do it, but what would you do? I said, go turn on the light. What would you do, literally?
What I do there?
Yeah.
Get him to go turn on the light.
All right, there's a switch over there. Boom, he would turn on the lights. All right, what if I told Pam, all right, go turn on the dark?
Good luck.
You cannot turn on the dark. All you can do is an absence of light.
Turn off.
The dark is
Right.
what's there when the light is absent. That's what he's talking about in the absence of salt and light. Our world is darkness and infection. So I love getting into that kind of depth and detail. Because of Ken, I feel like I'm a little less afraid of the Sermon on the Mount, but I still have deep respect, and I feel like I fall so far short of it, but it's helping me in that way.
I had horses and we have to have salt. I have salt licks for my horses. They have to have salt. Isn't that something?
Yeah, I know people that in that area would put it out for the deer and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
They
we had
have
those all
to
the
have
time.
it.
So,
Yep.
other observations about this then?
That's a good comparison.
Okay. Well, thank you for
I
your
thought it was
patience.
good.
We have now completed 6 of 8.
Mhm.
So there's 2 more in this series if you're willing to stick it out.
Sure.
I hope that we can bring back those who couldn't be here today, but thank you very much for your patience. If anybody's willing to help me rearrange the tables
No
afterwards.
problem, yeah.
I can,
50 cents.
I remember
Yeah,
how they're
50
supposed to go
cents.
now.
She
So.
said 50
50
cents.
cents.
I thought light under a bushel was kind of funny.
Then you were talking about that now, so I'm in my head singing the song.
I didn't, under a bushel. No!
Yeah.
I'm gonna let it.
That was way back
We
when.
sing it every Thursday with the kids.
Remember that?
So, and they don't even know what a bushel is. I don't even know what a bushel is.
Yeah.
Unless
hard
it's a
to find
bushel
them.
basket.
That's right.
Otherwise, I don't know if it.
Yeah.
But I've been told that ever since I've been little, when you got something that you do well and everything else, don't hide your light under a bushel. Don't hide that, let
Right.
people know what you do,
Yeah, yeah, don't keep it to
That's
yourself.
always,
Well, may I
That's
ask us
always
to
been
bow
it.
together in prayer before we go?
okay.
Gracious and wonderful God, we thank you that your light and salt are available to this and to everyone in the world that needs it so desperately. We thank you, Lord God, for the ways that you have shared effectively through us and through our church. We confess the ways that we have allowed the light to be hidden, the salt to be infected by impurities. And we ask, Lord, that you would give us courage to point out for others when we see those disparities, but that we would also have the courage to receive that when the criticism needs to come our way. Let us do so in love and go forward with good hearts. And I thank you, Lord God, that you finally got Ethel here, for crying out loud.
Yay,
Amen.
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 Amen. Bye.
God bless. Oh, there's the stop share. It's on
And
this.
can I tell you, I wasn't imagining the salt mounds. They're on Glendale Avenue, like Pastor.
Oh, okay.
But it's not